Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to day 2 of official Ixalan previews, and we got some cool cards to look at today. I'm actually pretty excited about today's group. I want to get into this pretty quick, so real fast, if you check out the description below, you'll find a couple ways to support us, one of which is Amazon affiliate links. If you make any purchases from Amazon, once you go through those links, it doesn't really matter what you buy, a small percentage will come back to help support us. Secondly, you'll also find our Patreon page below, and then finally, Flipside Gaming, they're linked below, and they gave our viewers a promo code for a discount, so check that out. With that being said, let's get into today's cards. Okay, Overflowing Insight, 3 blue and 4, it's a mythic sorcery, target player draws 7 cards. Let's talk about standard first with this one. Not really happy with it. It's not an instant, that's my issue with this simply, because if it was an instant, maybe I can conceive the possibility that there's a control deck out there that could play this and be okay with it, because yes, it's expensive, but you're drawing 7 cards, and you have those turns where you have a bunch of mana, your opponent doesn't do anything, and you didn't need to counter or remove anything, so you just have this mana available, so draw your 7 cards, and yeah, you're happy, right? But unfortunately, being a sorcery, that's just not the case with this card. I mean, you have things like Pull from Tomorrow already in Standard that are fantastic. This just doesn't have a place, unfortunately. Now, Commander, yeah, it's fine, but again, there's so many better draw spells you can choose from, unless you just don't have access to those spells, or you're looking for some crazy draw redundancy in your deck. I don't really see you playing this there either. When it comes to Sealed in Draft, is this playable? Yeah, it just depends on the deck. I mean, you have to feel like you can cast this. It's 3 on color. It's not going to be easy for a lot of decks to do. If you're not confident in your deck casting this, then don't run it. If you feel like you can, then maybe you run it and you're okay with it. I am a little concerned, though, about the speed of the format. I don't necessarily think this will be a super fast format, but it doesn't look like a slow format either, at least from what we've seen so far. So maybe you just sideboard this in slower matchups. Like maybe you had a board stall in game 1, and you feel like, well, if I was able to draw something like this, then I could have just attritioned my opponent out through that board stall and won the game that way. Well, yeah, then it makes sense. So yeah, I'm not really high on this card. Like, as far as draft goes, this is not an early pick for me by any means. This is maybe middle to later in the pack pick. Again, maybe a little better in pack 3 when I know what my deck can do and feel a little more confident that I can cast this. But yes, overall, this card is a little bit awkward and clunky, especially for a mythic. Siren Storm Tamer. This costs a blue. It's a Siren Pirate Wizard, uncommon, 1/1 with flying, and you can pay a blue, sacrifice a counter target spell or ability that targets you or a creature you control. I do like that it is counter target spell or ability. That's actually pretty sweet. So let's talk about Standard first with this card. We've seen cards like this actually make it into Standard before, these little 1-drop blue cards that gum up what your opponent's trying to do, slow them down, make them think about their plays, and maybe even let you ping in for a little bit of early damage. They can be good in control builds. The only thing I will say is I'm not completely convinced at this point from what I've seen from Ixalan that control is going to be a tier 1 deck in the meta going forward. So that could be a problem for this card. Now, we got a lot of Ixalan left to see, and of course there's more sets coming and the meta will evolve. At some point, as long as there is a viable control deck in blue, then yeah, there's probably going to be room at some point in its history for this card to get some standard play. Now, with that being said, I do think this is a decent 1-drop for sealed or for draft purposes. Don't think it's a high pick for me in draft necessarily, maybe a nice middle of the pack, even later of the pack pick. But it is a 1-drop that's actually playable, and a lot of times they don't give us those. Like, I haven't been a big fan of most 1-drops that we've been seeing for limited purposes anyway in these sets. I just feel like I'd rather have a 2-drop that's a little bit better. I don't feel like they always give us 1-drops that do enough. This one I think does enough. It's a 1-drop 1/1 flyer, so that on its own means it can ping for a little bit of damage, but that ability, making my opponent have to think about their plays going forward, I like that a lot, actually. So I could see myself playing this in limited formats. Again, not a high pick for me, though. And again, it's not going to be for all builds. This is for a deck that wants to be a little slower, a little more methodical, a little more controlling. If you're in an aggro build, you're going to pass on this, obviously, and it will stay in your sideboard. Next is Kitesail Freebooter. This is a black and 1 human pirate uncommon 1/3 with flying. When this enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. Exile that card until this leaves the battlefield. Okay, so this is kind of like a temporary duress on a Stormcrow, and you know what? I kind of like it. I actually love this card. Duress is a good card. Even if you miss, it's still free information. And this only costs you 2. I mean, the requirement isn't all that horrible, even if things don't go your way with the play. Granted, they could get the card back later on, probably will. But if you can grab an early play that would have been good for them early game, maybe not as good for them in the mid to late game, then you got that going for you, not to mention the information that you garnered from it. I think this is very standard playable, and as a matter of fact, another core piece to perhaps a Grixis Pirate deck that could actually be a thing in standard, and that's actually pretty exciting to see. So, fantastic card there, and this is going to be very good for you in draft and sealed as well. This potentially could be first pickable in a lot of packs too in draft. I think it's actually that good. Next we have Sanctumseeker, 2 black and 2 Vampire Knight. This one's a rare, 3/4. Whenever a vampire you control attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So first off, I want to say this is awesome for Commander. That Commander 2017 Vampire deck that we just saw come out, if you bought that and you're looking for a good upgrade that works well with Edgar Markov, this is the card for you. Notice that whenever a vampire you control attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Super sweet for multiplayer games. Great with Vampire Tribal. You're going to love this card there, no doubt. Let's talk about Limited next. Good card there, whether you're playing sealed or draft. In draft, maybe you first pick this and you just try to force vampires. That could be a thing. More than likely, though, it's better if you're already in vampires and then you open this pack 2 or pack 3 and then you just kind of go all in for that tribe and you'll be very happy. Even sealed, though, I'll say this. The card's just not bad even on its own. A 3/4 for 4 that when it attacks drains a point of life. It's actually not bad. So that's like very playable just on its own. And even if you had just a couple other vampires on your side, yeah, you might even get some extra benefit out of it. So don't feel like this has to be an all-in card because it doesn't necessarily have to be. It can still be a decent creature for you if it's the only vampire. Now, standard, a vampire deck would have to be a tier 1 deck in the format to really see this card gain traction there. And I'm not sold on that yet. Again, we got a lot of the set to see, so that could change, obviously, over the next couple weeks. But at least right now, I don't know if we're quite there. Now, if Shadows wasn't rotating out, then maybe that'd be a little different. There's some good vampires from that block. But the way it stands now, I'm not completely sold. I mean, this isn't quite as good as, say, Hell Rider. It's good, but it's not quite that good. And I think that could be an issue a little bit with this card going forward for, like, standard purposes anyway. Wanted Scoundrels, a black and 1 human pirate. It's an uncommon 4/3. When this dies, target opponent creates 2 colorless treasure artifact tokens. All right, this is one of those high risk, high reward cards for limited purposes. And we've seen these type of cards before. Sometimes they're great for you, especially if you're on the plane. You can drop this on turn 2 and then attack in turn 3, take 4 life off your opponent. Maybe if you're lucky, you even get to take another 4 life off the next turn, get them down to 12. It's actually a big chunk of life. If your opponent doesn't have an answer for this, they're in trouble. If they do have an answer for it, it could swing the other way on you, and this could blow up in your face a little bit, right? Giving them 2 bonus mana, basically, of any color, even if it's just one time to ramp out, could hurt you pretty badly, unless you have some strong control elements, like some creature removal or something like that in your hand to begin with. So you have to kind of know your deck on this one. I don't know if I'm going to play this in all my builds, but if I'm hyper aggressive, or maybe I'm even a little more controlling and have some heavy removal or something like that in my deck, it feels a little bit better, because that way if it backfires on me, I have like a escape plan, I guess. Now, this is another card I would consider maybe keeping in my deck when I'm on the play and then taking out when I'm on the draw, and that's just to maximize the chance that this works out for you, because you can steal a game with cards like this. It's very possible, but you have to be careful of that potential downside for sure. Now, because of all the things I just mentioned, I don't really see this getting play in standard. It's just too risky, and you have not only Lightning Strike, but Fatal Push, a whole bunch of other things that are real cheap and easy to get rid of this, and that can be real awkward for you in a constructed game, so it's not going to make it there, even in any kind of like pirate deck or anything like that. I just don't see it happening, unfortunately. But it is a card in limited. It's not for all builds. It's not for all situations, but I can definitely see it seeing play there. It's not a high draft pick for me either. Probably going to pick this up maybe middle of the pack and be okay with it. Drover of the Mighty. This costs a green and 1. It's a human druid, another uncommon 1/1. But this gets +2/+2 as long as you control a dinosaur, and you can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So this is what we get nowadays. We get 2-drop mana dorks instead of the 1-drop, but they try to give us some kind of upside to it, which I'm okay with, considering that is the standard right now for these type of cards. And this one has a pretty nice upside as long as you're in dinosaurs, right? If you're in some kind of dinosaur build, you got yourself a mana dork that potentially could become a 3/3, maybe even as early as turn 3 or 4. Yeah, that's actually pretty sweet. If you need the mana, wonderful. If you don't, you could even attack in with this or use it as a defender. It has a size that I feel comfortable with. Again, yes, it is dependent on me keeping another dinosaur in play, and that could be awkward at times. Now, beyond that, it's still a good mana dork. Like, if you need a mana dork, no matter what, it's going to be good for you. So if you have no dinosaurs in your deck, but you're worried about color fixing or ramping a little bit, it's still going to be playable. So yeah, this is a high draft pick for me. Depends on the pack. Maybe it's pack 1, pick 1, maybe it's pick 2 or 3, but yeah, it's definitely good, just depends on the pack. And again, even in sealed, you'll be really happy to see this, I think. Now, standard, could this see play like a dinosaur deck? Well, it feels like dinosaur decks will want to be 3 colors, so there's a chance it could see some standard play again if that type of deck can get there in the meta. Alright, our next card comes to us from a Korean language spoiler. Loosely translated, it's Wild Growth Walker, a green and 1 elemental 1/3. Whenever a creature you control explores, put a +1/+1 counter on this and you gain 3 life. Alright, so this is a fine card. I mean, it's a 2-drop, it's a fine 2-drop, 1/3, it's a little bit on the defensive side, but that's okay. I can see picking this up maybe in the middle portion of a pack, maybe even a little bit later in a pack. If I have some Explorer triggers in my deck, wonderful. This maybe becomes a 2/3, maybe if I'm lucky, a 3/4, and I got my money's worth out of this card. And the life gain sometimes will be consequential, sometimes it won't. If you're ahead, probably won't matter much, but if you're up against a super aggro deck, then yeah, it could come into play for sure. And if you're not main decking this for some reason, then you come up against an aggro deck, sure, sideboard it in, right? So again, not a high draft pick for me necessarily, but it's a fine card. The 2-drop spot of your limited decks are very critical. Sometimes you're just searching for decent 2-drops. This is a decent 2-drop regardless. Becomes better with the more Explorer triggers that you're going to find in your deck, of course. Now, because it's so dependent on the Explorer triggers and such, again, I don't see this doing a whole lot in Standard or anything like that, but it's just a fine 2-drop limited card. Alright, our next one is another rare. It's Conquerors Galleon. This is a vehicle, 2/10. And when this attacks, exile it at the end of combat, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. It has crew 4. It turns into Conqueror's Foothold. It's a land. You can tap for colorless mana, or you can pay 2 and tap to loot, pay 4 and tap to draw a card, or pay 6 and tap to return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Okay, you're jumping through some hoops here, so take this into account. The land side's awesome. Like, all day long, I'd be happy to have this thing. Taps for mana. If I have some extra mana, I can either loot, draw a card, or recur something from my graveyard to hand. Phenomenal. Happy to do it. And notice it's target card from graveyard to hand, not creature, so very versatile. Super sweet. Getting there, though, it's going to take a little time. You got to play this for 4. Its crew cost is 4, which is pretty substantial as well. You attack in 2/10, it should survive, barring any sort of removal or anything like that. If your opponent has some sort of artifact or creature destruction, that could be a little awkward, but if you can survive with it and turn this into the land, awesome. But you are required to do some setup to get there. Because of that, I would say for limited purposes, very playable in a sealed pool. Draft is still very playable, but I don't see myself necessarily first picking this, although there's something to be said for first picking a card that has no color requirement, sometimes to stay open, depending on the pack, but I see this as maybe being a little bit later in the high to middle portion of the pack of a pickup for me anyway. Now, Standard is just asking too much. And again, there's just too many hoops you have to go through here to make it do what you want it to do. I think it's a little too awkward for there, especially in a Standard where Braid exists. That card is just too good and can just wipe this thing out for all the trouble that you've gone through, and that's a little awkward. Now, another place I could see where this card could be fun is Commander, again, because you're not always punished as much for a lengthy setup because of the multiplayer style of that game. It could be fun here, and it's a great mana sink for as long as you have it once it's turned. Pirate's Cutlass. This costs 3. It's an equipment, common, and when this enters the battlefield, attach it to target pirate you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+1, equip 2. This is an okay limited card. It's not for all builds, obviously. If you have a lot of pirates, it could be alright for you if you're looking for like a 22nd, 23rd playable. Maybe more so in a draft deck than a sealed deck, because if I have maybe a few pirates, this card just isn't really doing enough, and I'm probably cutting it. But if I'm playing draft and I drafted a whole bunch of pirates, and again, I'm just looking for one more card to help me be a little more aggressive, then this is just fine in that build. So again, not a first pick by any means, but if you're already in that archetype and this comes up like later in pack 2 or pack 3, then yeah, it's a decent pickup, especially if you're trying to go aggressive. All right, next we have another transform card. It's Theomatic Compass. It transforms into Spires of Araska. So it costs 2. It's an artifact. It's another rare. It costs 3 and tap for the ability. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, transform. Transforms into this land that you can tap for colorless mana or untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So it has kind of a quasi Maze of Ith type ability on it. I mean, it's a little different than the Maze of Iths, maybe not quite as good, but it's close, it's decent. It's a very interesting ability that you don't see printed all the time, right? And it's a helpful ability, especially if you're behind or in a stalled board state. Like, you'll be real happy to have a card like this on your side, right? Now, getting there, it's going to take a little time, and that's kind of the crux of some of these cards. Only costs 2, that's nice, not a huge mana requirement. It's a nice mana sink to help you fix your colors, find the basic lands you need, thin your deck a little bit. Of course, a 3 activation cost isn't nothing, so you do have to consider that. And later in the game, it does finally turn into this card, which is actually quite useful. So as far as draft goes, I'd say, much like the last card, I don't know if I'm first picking this. I could in some packs, I think, but it's still probably a higher pack pick. I think the power level here is actually decent. Sealed, happy to play it in sealed. If I have room for it, I'll run it for sure, depending on my game plan. But standard, I think it's just asking too much again. Like, yeah, the Maze of Ith style card could be good later in the game, but are you going to get there? Can you take the turn off to kind of play this for 2? I mean, 2's not too much, but then that mana sink of 3 to actually have it do something prior to flipping isn't super exciting for me in the world of standard. It feels just a little too clunky again there. And I don't know, I like my standard cards to be a little more streamlined and a little more certain. I want certainty behind what I play in standard. Cards that don't give me that certainty as to how they're going to unfold, they're too reliant on the game state and the board state, I start to feel a little nervous about them, and that's how I feel about this one at this point. I will say this though, fantastic commander card. Like, I'd be really happy to play this in commander. Fix your colors, thin out your deck, go get your lands, and then relatively quickly into the game have this Maze of Ith type effect. I think that could be really sweet as a deterrence for people when they're thinking about who to attack and such. So yeah, I like this one there. I think this is really a strong commander pick. All right, with that being said, those are the cards for today, and it was actually a pretty sweet group of cards. Power level-wise, maybe yesterday overall was a little higher, but I feel like we saw a lot of cards that were really good in certain niches this time around. Like, certain decks, they would fit in and do a good job, or certain game styles, right? So I think that's sweet. I really like the design so far from Ixalan, and looking forward to see what comes out over the next few days. So we'll be back tomorrow. We'll do another video about 24 hours from now, recapping everything that happens between now and then when it comes to previews. Until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.